Hey, hopefully everybody had a great weekend. Couple reminders before we get started today. Christmas party is next week. We have two locations, Anaheim and Rancho Bernardo this year. Both are from 6 to 8. Both are at Carl Strauss. We've sent out a few reminders via email. We're going to send out a text blast today too, just to make sure everybody's received it in case those emails are hitting spam. But there's a RSVP form on there. If you're planning to attend, if you can please just fill that out so we can get a head count. We got to get that over to Carl Strauss today so they can start preparing and get the menu ready and all that stuff. One other thing, I'm going to be traveling today, and I'm going to be on a kind of a long flight. I'm going out to Peru. My son's getting married. So it's a pretty long flight out to Peru. We're leaving in a few hours. I have a couple layovers, but I will have my cell phone on me the whole time. We have service there and everything, but just today it'll be a little intermittent. If you need anything like urgent, um, if you can contact Phil Benler, his cell phone is 949-922-5649. I'll put it on my voicemail as well, just in case you need anything super urgent. But other than that, I'll be available every few hours today after about like 1:30 or something like that. So, and then the rest of the week is just kind of normal. So it's just today I'll be a little intermittent. Um, and then today's meeting is meant to be kind of a Q&A. So if you can kind of think in your head any challenges you've been having with buyer rep agreements, if you're not understanding how the flow is working, if you have questions about why are other agents doing this or that, please throw those in the chat or raise your hand and I'll call on you as we go. But I wanted to do a little recap. There have been a few updates. I wanted to talk about um, the DOJ last week. They piped in on the settlement for the approval hearing. So I want to just touch on that a little bit. And that's about it. So before we get started today, we actually have someone from our Tried and True Home Loans team. We have Gary McDonald. He's going to touch on some rates and a few other things real quick before we get started. Good morning, Gary. How's it going?
Thanks, Travis. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending the meeting. So yeah, as Travis said, my name is Gary McDonald. I'm with the Tried and True Home Loans, which is basically the financing partner of Rise Realty. And as agents of Rise Realty, your brokers, Travis, and as loan officers of Tried and True Home Loans, our brokers also Travis. So we're basically under the same umbrella. And although it's not compulsory to use a loan officer from Tried and True Home Loans on your transactions, we do ask that you give us the opportunity to earn your business. So now I'm going to do a little bit of screen sharing. This one. And hopefully you can see. So in the Rise Realty back office, you'll see over here the Tried and True Home Loans logo, and there's a link below. So if you do click on that logo or the link, this is the list of the loan officers at Tried and True. So like I said, it would be great if you did give us an opportunity to earn your business. But if you do find one, here's me. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of those in there that you can access. So now I'm going to go on to the slideshow. So basically, in our market, as realtors and as loan officers, we are both asked two questions. How's the market and what is the current rate, the interest rate? Now, on the market, I'm not going to touch that. That's not my field. But on the interest rate, I get asked all the time, both by realtors and by the consumers, about the current rate. What is it? And it's such a dangerous question to try and answer because there are so many variables that go into deciding what rate is going to be. And I'm going to go touch over them real fast on this slide. All right. So there's basically the personal factors, which is dependent on the person and the loan and the property and all that good stuff. And then there's more of a broader sense with the economy and how the economy is doing. So this week, I'm just going to lay out the personal factors that can affect the interest rate. So, so this week I'm going to touch on credit score. There's other ones which I'll touch on in later meetings, but I don't have the time to do it all right now. It's just too much information. So the credit score can affect the interest rate because primarily the interest rate or the lender is going to be looking at risk. And the higher the risk, the higher the rate. So if you have a low credit score, the lender's going to see that as a higher risk and your rate is going to be higher. And then with the debt to income ratio, again, a higher debt to income ratio also means it's a higher risk. And the debt to income ratio is going to be the housing costs and also your other costs like loans and car payments, child support and alimony and all that good stuff. So if your borrower has a lot of that, it can affect the rate and it can also get the loan denied. And then there's the loan amount. I don't see it that often on a smaller loan, but on the excessively large loans, and I'll touch on this a little bit in a while on the high balance loans, but jumbo loans tend to be a little bit higher than conventional loans by about half a point or so. But again, it's a dangerous thing to start quoting on that. But the conforming high balance loans, which again I'll show you in a minute, can affect rates. And then the down payment, or another version, is loan to value. If you have a larger down payment, again, less risk and often a lower rate. And if you do a smaller payment, you can have mortgage insurance, which can get quite expensive too. And then the last four is loan type. Again, we've got conventional FHA, VA, and USDA on conforming loans. And then again, you've got jumbo loans, but there are so many loan products out there and rates vary on each one. So again, loan type, it's really hard to give a specific quote. And then long term, most people are doing a 30-year fix, but if you can do a 20-year or a 15-year fixed, rates tend to be a little bit lower. And then property type, investment properties and second homes are usually a higher risk, because if a person's going to default on a property, they're more likely to default not on their primary residence where they're living. It'll be an investment or a second home that they'll walk away. So again, higher risk, higher rate, and occupancy is basically the same as the property type on that. So I'm going to touch on the first one, the interest rate. And I ran some numbers yesterday. And again, this is just a close estimate of what rates are. Each borrower is going to be different. So on a conventional loan, it just shows how the rates vary based on the FICO scores. So 740 is obviously a very good score. And then as the FICO goes down, the rates go up quite significantly. FHA loans, a lower rate than the conventional, but again, going up. VA loan, again, going up, probably not as much as the other two. So the FICO score can have a huge impact on rates. And so when we look at rates and how it can affect our business, both as real estate agents and loan officers, I have this little chart here covering the last 5 years. And it shows that from basically 2014 to the start of the pandemic in around 2019, it was reasonably level. And then as rates go down in 2020 and 21, you can see that the sales volume went up. And now as the rates have gone up, you see that the sales volume is plummeting. So hopefully next year, rates will come down and that will see an upturn in sales. And so next thing I'm going to touch on real fast, is coming to the end of the year, 2024. So next year, January 1st, the FHA mortgage limits are going to be going up, which is going to affect how much a borrower can borrow for a conventional or an FHA loan. And so let me show you what the numbers are. So at the moment, I've just done the counties in Southern California, and these are the new limits for 25. So in Imperial County for a 1-unit building, like a house or a condo, it's going to be 524, 225. Los Angeles is 1,209,750, as in Orange County. Riverside, San Bernardino, 672, 750, so they're a bit higher. And then San Diego is a little lower than Orange and LA at 1,077. So basically, these are the maximum loans that someone can get before going jumbo in these counties. Now, I don't know if anyone's on who's in a different county and wants me to quote them. I can do that. But that's where we're at right now. And then I'll give you my contact information. So if you do want to contact me, you can write down my information from this, or if you have a smartphone, you can scan the QR code at the bottom right there. And it's actually a very good, this is basically a virtual business card, which I use a lot. And there is a service which does it for free. I'll give you the information in a second on that one. But if you want to scan the QR code, you're more than welcome to, and that will save my contact information in your cell phone. So if you use this feature and you're out and you don't have any physical business cards or would rather go this route, I highly recommend getting a virtual business card. So it's always with you. It's always with your smartphone, and it also goes directly into that person's phone. And the benefit of that is if you're calling them, quite often people won't answer the phone if they don't know who it is. Now, if you're in their contacts, it'll show up as you, so they're more likely to answer their phone. So the company I'm using is blink.me, and they do have a free service. I'm trying now to figure out how to stop. Okay, and the slideshow. So over here, this is the company that I've been using for the virtual business card, blink.me. It's worked for me, and on the pricing, they do have a free version. So if you want to do that, I'd highly recommend having it on your phone. And I'm going to stop my screen sharing right now. I'm back with you. So hopefully that all went well. It's my first Zoom call doing it this week.
Awesome.
Hopefully
Thanks for that. I haven't heard of that company, but that's good, and I like that they have a free version. So
Yeah,
even the $5, I mean, if I guess looks like it had some customization options and stuff, so
yeah.
that's pretty cool.
It's a good service. So that's
Nice.
basically where I'm at right now. And are we going to have a meeting in 2 weeks? I think that would be Christmas week, won't it?
What was that?
Are we having a meeting in 2 weeks? I think, is that not Christmas week?
not 2 weeks, but next week will be
I
basically the
think
last one of the
I think
year.
Paul is on that one. So happy holidays to all the people at Rise, and I'll see
And
you
we'll
again
probably see you at
next.
the Christmas party. Yeah,
I'll be at the Orange County one next Monday. So
awesome.
I'll see
Cool.
you.
Yeah, we'll see you there. So,
All right.
all right, thanks for that. And let's go ahead. Hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So, main purpose of today is, we've gone over um, buyer rep agreements, working with sellers, working with unrepresented buyers, seller concessions. We've done a lot of these meetings over the past few months. They've all been recorded. They're all on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in them, maybe you didn't catch one or something. But I wanted to do a little bit of a check-in or a review or whatever, because I do still field quite a few calls. There's new scenarios that come up. And I know, I think that it's the transition into the buyer rep agreements and implementing them into our business seems to have gone better than what a lot of people seem to have expected. Um, I don't think we're getting a lot of pushback on it because basically everybody's doing it, which is kind of what I expected. However, I am fielding calls still a little bit. I'm hearing, on the listing side, hey, the buyer's agents keep sending me their BRBC and they're not sending the SPBB. Is that okay? The answer to that is no, not really. I mean, if they're expecting the seller to pay, that's what the SPBB form is for. That's the 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 buyer's asking the seller to pay the amount on the BRBC. So it's little things like that where I think there's still maybe some adjustments that we're getting used to with the flow of how the offer goes, how are you responding, things like that. So today is the day to ask any questions that you have about that. I'm going to go through some things and then either pop some questions in the chat as we go. Um, Tell us how you're doing out there. What are you seeing? Has the transition, into using buyer rep agreements full time, gone well for you, not well? So just wanted to have basically some open dialogue with this and cover any questions as we go. So just again, throw them in the chat as we go. And I'm going to answer as much as I can today about anything having to do with, basically this NAR change, whether listing side, buyer side, whichever. So first, let's talk about the DOJ. They piped in very last minute. I'm sure you saw all the communications and things on social media and all this stuff about the DOJ and what their comments were essentially on this settlement. Because this whole time, this was the proposed agreement, it had not been approved yet. More than likely, we were all expecting for it to be approved, but it hadn't been approved yet. And that's what happened a couple weeks ago. And then literally like Sunday night, the DOJ popped in and was like, hey, here's our feelings on this. And truthfully, I didn't really like it that much. So this came from RIS Media. If you don't follow them, they have some decent stuff. Um, some of the board of realtors offer you a free subscription because this mostly is a paid media source. I know North County Association of Realtors in San Diego has a free subscription with them. But anyways, DOJ filed a statement of interest in the Burnett versus NAR lawsuit, which clarified that the DOJ's lack of participation in the lawsuit doesn't limit the United States' ability to enforce the antitrust laws, including to seek greater relief for the conduct at issue here. In terms of the practice changes set forth by NAR, the DOJ did not find the off MLS offers of compensation to be of any issue. So they're not taking issue with how it's set up now by not having offers of compensation in the MLS, but specifically called out buyer broker agreements as a point of contention. So they don't like our buyer broker agreements. So they said this provision itself raises independent concerns under the antitrust laws, which could be addressed in multiple ways, the filing states. Explaining further, DOJ noted that the new provision that requires buyers and brokers to make written agreements before home tours could harm buyers and limit how brokers compete for clients. And that statement right there leads me to believe that we are definitely going to see some sort of change, new form, new forms, new process, new something, probably as early as this year in 2025. Um, I don't know if they're going to wait and see if, additional lawsuits get brought up or if they're just going to kind of step in and say something. Who knows? But they're really alluding, in my opinion, to, hey, this, we're not done with this yet. So the buyer broker agreements, bears a close resemblance to prior restrictions among competitors that courts have found to violate the antitrust laws in other proceedings and could limit rather than enhance competition for buyers among buyer brokers. The filing continues. DOJ also noted that the final approval of the settlement would not further prevent action from them, but added that if any brokerages, agents, or NAR do find themselves facing antitrust litigation in the future, they may attempt to use any findings in the court decision as a shield against future enforcement action by the United States. Um, so the statement of interest does not stand to have a major impact on the settlement's approval, but rather sets the stage for further action from the DOJ. And that's kind of how I'm reading this as well. Multiple articles coming out. So antitrust in a nutshell, what is that? What should we be looking at as licensees in this industry? So antitrust laws, also known as competition laws, are regulations and statutes that promote fair and open competition in markets and industries. They protect consumers from anti-competitive business practices and mergers and ensure that consumers have access to high-quality goods and services at competitive prices. Antitrust laws prohibit a variety of business practices, including monopolization, price fixing. That's one that you get that comes up in our industry. That's what came up with the commissions and everything else. So collusion, another one that you hear about in our industry, bid rigging, group boycotts, abuse of dominance. So really, I think that their focus could be on price fixing, collusion, things like that. That's, I think, where the scrutiny is going to be in our industry. And that's where we really want to, um, I guess, watch our language as we're talking to clients and things like that, and removing words like standard commission and basically anything standard, because technically nothing is. It's all negotiable. So we really want to be mindful of how we're talking, because we don't want somebody to make a claim that we are price fixing or colluding to price fix as an industry. The Sherman Act is a central antitrust statute, and state antitrust laws generally follow federal statutes. So under scrutiny, again, while the NAR settlement seems to be in our rearview mirror, it's evident the DOJ has its eye on the real estate industry. While I've been saying it's business as usual, just go and do your thing. Here's the new flow, continue doing business. At least a modified version of it. We need to be sure we are abiding by the new rules. Practices such as any sort of commission sharing should be avoided at all costs. I know that the settlement doesn't necessarily prohibit you as the real estate agent taking a or negotiating a larger commission or any sort of commission with your seller and then sharing your share of it. But I would steer clear of that at all costs. None of our forms are set up for that now. The listing agreement does not have anything in there stating any type of commission sharing. So just steer clear of that altogether. Excuse me. So the other is modifying buyer compensation agreements to be higher than what was originally agreed upon. That should also be avoided at all costs. That is against the NAR rules. It's also against DRE, California law now with AB 2992. So um, don't do either one of those things as we continue moving on to or moving into the new year. We are going to be scrutinized with these things. So use the forms as intended and, you know, just stay away from commission sharing and don't modify your buyer rep agreements to be higher than what you originally agreed upon. Start high and then negotiate from there. Excuse me. So, uh, get your value proposition dialed in as a buyer's agent. Negotiate with your buyer for the highest fee you can agree upon upfront. Leave room for negotiation during the offer phase. This is truthfully what I'm seeing the most right now. Offers coming in, I'm seeing a lot come in with a 2.5 or a 3%, or we had one come in much higher than that. It was a piece of land, but buyers agents, I think the ones that really have their value proposition dialed in are starting high because they know that when they go to negotiate the offer with the listing agent and seller, that their commission is probably going to be part of that negotiation. So um, think about that. Don't start low because we actually just had this happen last week with an agent where they had a 2% buyer rep agreement and got into escrow. Escrow instructions came across at 2.5% because that's what the seller had planned on offering. And it was 2% in the SPVB. Um, Everywhere read 2%, but I guess per the listing agreement or some sort of conversation, I'm not exactly sure how that came about. Escrow said, well, the seller was going to pay 2.5. Well, our agent couldn't take that other 0.5% because that was higher than what he had negotiated previously in his buyer rep agreement. So technically, he left some money on the table, 0.5% of commission on a $1.2 million house. So don't start on the low side. Don't cut yourself short. So use this is all part of the negotiation. So I think add that into your value proposition as you go. While we're doing the offer, you can modify your agreement with your buyer. You can modify it down. So let's say you started at 3%. And with your buyer, you said, hey, I'm going to go represent you. Here's everything I'm going to do for you. I charge 3% for my services. I'm going to negotiate that with the offer, and I'm going to do my best to get the seller to credit 3% towards this. And maybe you have a verbal agreement with them. Look, I can be flexible as we go, but let's start here and move forward. So you make the offer, seller counters back along with other terms, but in the counter offer says, you know what? I don't want to pay 3%. I'm only willing to pay 2% to you as the buyer's agent. Well, at that point, the agent presents the counter offer back to the buyer and says, okay, well, here's all the other terms. And by the way, they only want to contribute 2% towards your obligation to pay me 3%, meaning the buyer still owes 1% out of their pocket. And at that point, you can renegotiate with them. You would use Form MT buyer representation. It's modification of terms, buyer representation. There's two of them in there now in zip forms. And you can use that to modify your compensation amount at that point. You may consider putting in that modification agreement that it is only for this particular property or something like that. But um, you can modify it at that point because you're modifying it down. You're renegotiating with the buyer to help them get into this house. Um, so that's how that looks these days, and that's what I'm actually seeing quite a bit. Had a few come into the chat. So, didn't buyer receive that 0.5 as a credit? That is a no, because um, that's not how the buyer rep agreement reads. It used to read that way, the old one. It does not now. So, essentially, half percent got left on the table. Maybe the listing agent ended up keeping it, however the listing terms were on that, but it did not go over to the buyer as a credit. So don't leave money on the table was kind of the moral of that story. Um, so I just want to go over AB 2992 a little bit. What was that, last month? Maybe the month before. Um, Actually, it was last month. Probably saw a lot of stuff on social media. Oh, we don't, buyer rep agreements, no more of them, and this and that. And that was all, basically false, just hype stuff. Buyer rep agreements are still needed, and they are needed prior to touring the property if it is a 1 to 4 single family sale, not not a lease or anything else. If it's a single family purchase, a sale of 1 to 4 units, the uh, the compensation agreement, the buyer compensation agreement you have with your client needs to be in place prior to touring the home. That is the NAR rules. So that is going to stand. What happened is 2992 expanded that to say that it needs to be done prior to the buyer making an offer on the property. However, that is going to be for all other types of sales. So mixed use or anything commercial, vacant land, all of that stuff was not in the NAR settlement. So technically, you didn't even need the buyer rep agreement for those types of sales, technically, because it was supposed to be single family homes, 1 to 4 units. But California expanded it. So now basically, if you are working with any buyer on any type of property, you need to have a compensation agreement in place with them, and it needs to be in place prior to making an offer, unless it is a single family home, 1 to 4 unit purchase, then it needs to be prior to touring the home. So for most of us, we're already doing this prior to touring the home. Keep doing that, because on January 1st, nothing changes with that. Just continue doing that. But if you are working with, 5+ unit apartment buildings, any type of commercial building, anything like that that is not a lease, you will now also need to have a compensation agreement in place with your client. And it needs to be in place prior to making the offer. So basically, California just expanded on the NAR rules. So they included basically everybody, every licensee now, not just residential licensees. So the law applies to real property, 1 to 4 unit, multis, commercial vacant land, ground leases coupled with improvements, manufactured homes. Yes, same thing. You have to do them there. Does not apply to leases and rental agreements, sale of state or federal land, loan brokering services. So timing per AB 292, when do you have to have the agreement in place? Buyer broker representation agreement shall be executed between the buyer's agent and buyer as soon as practicable, but no later than the execution of the buyer's offer. So again, that is up for every property, but residential 1 to 4 sales, again, prior to touring the property. Nothing has changed there. So if you do not have that in place and there was some sort of audit or anything like that, this could be a void and unenforceable agreement. Buyer representation agreement that is made in violation of these provisions is void and unenforceable, meaning you may not earn compensation for services. You're going to be working for free. So just make sure that you're following the rules. Again, backing up a little bit, we're under scrutiny now. I feel like they're going to be looking for other reasons to come after our industry and make changes to how we practice business. So just be compliant as possible. Get those buyer rep agreements in place as soon as practical or before touring the home if it's 1-4. Wanted to review real quick, what does it mean to be working with a buyer? So they have a technical term for this now. They came out with this with the NAR settlement. Actual, what does it mean to be working with a buyer? Essentially procuring cause, So the working with language is intended to distinguish MLS participants and now any licensed agent pursuant to AB 2992 who provide full or limited brokerage representation or services for the buyer. So working with the buyer means you are identifying potential properties for them. This does not mean you have them on a property drip from MLS or from your CRM or anything like that, and you're just randomly sending them properties to a lead that maybe you haven't even spoke to. You are not working with that person. You're working with that person when you've had a conversation about, hey, here is this property I found. We have been in communication. Let's go check it out. Um, Arranging for the buyer to tour a property, performing or facilitating negotiations on behalf of the buyer, presenting offers by the buyer, or other services for the buyer from MLS participants who simply market their service or just talk to a buyer, like at an open house, or providing an unrepresented buyer access to a house that they have listed. So these are all working with a buyer. The agent working with if the agent is working only as an agent or sub-agent for the seller, then the participant is not working with the buyer. In that scenario, an agreement is not needed because the participant is performing work for the seller, not for the buyer. So, example, open houses. So, you do not have to have a buyer rep agreement or a PSRA with every single person that walks in the door because you're not technically working with that buyer. You're working on behalf of the seller on showing this house. Um, so hopefully that answers that question. Authorized dual agents, on the other hand, work with the buyer and the seller. A written buyer agreement is required prior to a buyer touring a 1-4 unit home. So what does that look like? This would be maybe someone calls on your sign and they say, hey, I'm not working with an agent. I want to go and check out this house. And if I like it, I want you to be my agent and represent me. Okay, well, now you will need to get a buyer rep agreement or the PSRA in place with them for a compensation amount between you and that buyer. And then you'll go and tour the home. And then let's say they like it. They're going to make their offer. You're going to include the SPBB form for the same amount as you negotiated with that buyer to ask the seller to pay that amount. And that's how you earn your dual commission because you already have an agreement with the listing agent for your listing fee. And now you have an agreement with the buyer for the buyer fee. And then the buyer asks the seller to pay that amount. Let's say they agree, and now there's compensation being paid on both sides. So from the seller. You could also, let's say the seller says no, and the buyer says, well, I'll still pay you even if the seller's not willing to pay. You can still earn that same commission as well. Essentially, you're still earning both sides of the commission. One is coming from the buyer for the buyer representation, one is coming from the seller for the seller representation. So that is how that looks in a dual agency. What does it mean to tour a home? Touring a home means when the buyer and or the MLS participant or other agent at the direction of the MLS participant working with the buyer enter the house. This includes when the MLS participant or other agent at the direction of the MLS participant work with the buyer enters the home to provide a live virtual tour or to a buyer not physically present. So that could include maybe you have an out-of-state buyer or something like that. You have they say, hey, can you do virtual tour? Let's do FaceTime. I want to see this house. There's no way I can get out there to tour homes. I really like this online. It looks great. Yada yada yada. Um, well, technically, you're going to go tour that home even though they're not with you. So you would need a buyer rep agreement in place to do that if it's a virtual tour via FaceTime or other. So a home defined by that means a residential property consisting not less than 1 to 4 units. Open houses, I kind of just touched on this. If MLS participant hosts an open house and provides access to a property on behalf of the seller only to an unrepresented buyer, they are not required to enter into a written agreement with those buyers touring the home as they are working on behalf of the seller. You are permitted to talk to these buyers touring the home. Should your conversation progress into a situation where the prospective buyer would like to make an offer on the home through you in a dual agency scenario, or tour other homes with you, at that point you will need a compensation agreement in place, or prior to touring the other homes. So let's say that, they came in unrepresented to your open house, they looked at it, you guys hit it off, they go, you know what, I don't want to buy this home, but I'm interested in working with you on other homes. That's when you would put it in prior to touring the other homes. You don't need it for that particular home because they came in unrepresented, and then a relationship evolved from there. Compensation amounts, MLS participants may not receive compensation for services other than from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the buyer rep agreement. We just went over that. Does this mean brokerages can only have one agreement with the buyer? That is no. The practice change empowers buyers and brokers to negotiate and agree to services and compensation that work for them. Licensed agents should work with consumers to ensure they fully understand the options available. Be as transparent as you can with negotiating this stuff. Compensation continues to be negotiable and should always be negotiated between MLS participants and the buyers. I hear this a lot, and it's kind of like nails on a chalkboard. When an agent calls me up and say, "Hey, what's the standard commission now that the NAR rules went in effect?" And I have to stop everybody right there because, for one, there was no standard commission before. There was never a standard commission. It's always been negotiable. And there still is no standard commission. I guess you can call it customary or what I'm seeing in the market, but there is no standard rate of compensation for any type of property. Mobile home under 100,000, vacant piece of land, commercial. It's all 100% negotiable. And if clients start talking to you about that standards, using the word standards, you probably want to stop them there because, we don't want to get into this, um, you know, colluding to price fix scenario that all of us agents basically got looped into with this NAR lawsuit, right? So this is where it came about. So we don't want to be guilty of doing that, and you never know who you're talking to. Um, maybe it's a mole. I don't know. So try and keep that word standard out of your conversations when you're talking about any type of compensation or anything like that. I did have a scenario come up. Um, Geez, that was just last week too, where someone asked if you can have variable rates on your buyer rep agreement. And you can't have a range where you can say on there, buyer will pay me anywhere from 2 to 3%, depending on what the seller is willing to pay. That's a no-no. We can't do that. But can you say something like, if the home price is 500,000 or less, the buyer would agree to pay me X%. And if the home price is 500K or more, then they agree to pay me this price. That is a set fee that you are putting in place, and that is okay. You just can't do the range and leave it like kind of open-ended. Um, can you do it, can you say if, buyer finds the home on their own and uses me, then, the fee will be this. But if I find the home for them and they use me, it'll be this amount. Yes, you're fixing a fee, and that is okay. Just no ranges. So, um, let's see. At times, a new or amended buyer agreement may be appropriate, and the buyer and broker may agree to amend the terms. However, amended agreements must also meet the NAR requirements and of AD 2992. Essentially, don't go higher than what you originally agreed to. If you go lower, it's okay. Can stay the same. You cannot go higher. Um, Can you agree to the range compensation? I just covered this. No, you can't do any range. An example, written buyer agreement cannot have a commission that is buyer broker compensation shall be whatever the amount the seller is offering the buyer. That's not how this works. Or between X and Y percent. No. If you look at the buyer rep agreement, it does actually have a little checkbox where you can attach a table, like a commission table on there, but you're not doing a range in there. You're doing fixed prices based on sales prices or other things, and that is okay. Unrepresented buyers and listing brokers. I went over this, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago. I wanted to touch on it. Does anybody have any questions as we're kind of going? Um, oh yeah, someone piped in on the short sale queen. I don't know if you guys saw that whole thing. So, unrepresented buyers and listing brokers. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. What I really wanted to touch on, because a question keeps coming up about in the listing agreement about essentially the extra fee. Um, so when we're looking at the listing agreement, this is page 1 here. We have on C2. So on C1, that's where you put your compensation. This is your fee for service as a listing agent. You're saying, hey, for my fee of representing you, I charge this amount. And the seller says, great, I'll pay you that. And it could be a flat fee, it could be a percentage, it could be whatever. And again, you can do a compensation schedule in there just as you can on the buyer rep agreement saying, if the home sells under this amount, then this is going to be the fee. If it is over this amount, this will be the fee. On C2, it says additional compensation to seller's broker if buyer is unrepresented. And this is the key right here. It does not apply to dual agency. This is not your dual agency fee right here. This is what I am calling the extra work fee. The extra work as a listing agent to deal with an unrepresented buyer. So this is a buyer comes, they come in your open house, they call on your sign, they contact you through, the internet, whatever. And maybe they feel really good about, their knowledge of, real estate practices, and they say, or maybe they think they're going to get a better deal on the house or something. I don't know. But they say, hey, I'm going to represent myself. I do not want representation from you, and I don't have an agent. Okay, so you're going to earn your fee as a listing agent on C1, and then on C2, if you put something here, and I've been putting 0.5%, you can put whatever amount you want in here that is agreeable to the seller as the extra work fee, because it is essentially extra work to deal with this unrepresented buyer, because more than likely they don't have the forms needed to make offers and things like that, the advisories and all the stuff that goes along with a real estate transaction. So you'll want to put an amount here in the event that happens and have that conversation with the seller too, that, hey, this is extra work, this is extra liability, this is all these extra things um, when dealing with these unrepresented buyers. So be sure to put that in there, but that is not your dual agency fee. The so maybe buyer is underrepresented, like I explained previously, they come into the open house and they're like, hey, I don't have an agent and I really like this house. I want to make an offer and I want you to be my agent. Boom. That is going to be a dual agency. You put a buyer rep agreement in place, you negotiate your commission with the buyer, they make the offer, they ask the seller to pay that compensation, so on and so forth. So just like I explained earlier. So why might a listing broker ask the seller for additional compensation? Just like I was saying, asking for forms and such as a purchase offer, allowing access to the property. Now you got to drive over there. You got to give them access. You got to let the home inspectors in, the appraiser in, all that kind of stuff when maybe that was for the buyer's agent to do. Interacting with escrow and title, inspectors, all that stuff. So that's why I call it the extra work fee. You can call it whatever you want. I'm sure there's a more glamorous name for it out there. All these activities expose the listing broker to additional risk, but the listing broker may need to provide some of those services to facilitate the sale for the seller's benefit and thus fulfill the listing broker's fiduciary duty to the seller. So, a couple key things if this happens. Can a seller refuse to receive offers from unrepresented buyers? The answer is yes, but there is little incentive for the seller to do so. I mean, the unrepresented buyer might have a great offer. It's just going to take a little extra work on everybody to get the deal done. The offer may be professionally prepared by an experienced investor or poorly prepared by a novice purchaser. It's most likely in the seller's best interest to receive all offers, even those from unrepresented buyers, and then decide on how to respond, if at all, to such offers on their merits, including taking into account that the buyer is underrepresented. Can the listing broker provide a purchase offer form to an unrepresented buyer? Answer is yes. Car terms of use allow a broker to provide forms to any party in a transaction for which the broker is acting as the agent. The listing broker who does this should first get permission of the seller. To reduce risk of creating an agency relationship with the buyer, the listing broker should not fill in any substantive terms or blank fields of the offer, but instead should only include the property address and the buyer's name on the form. That's actually the minimum in order to download a blank form in Zip Forms anyways. You have to have those items in there. The broker can also name the listing brokerage as the seller's agent only in the agency confirmation paragraph. If a listing broker gives an unrepresented buyer a blank offer, what else should the broker do or not do? Broker should provide the buyer with a buyer non-agency agreement, so form BNA. So, instead of a for sale by owner, now we have a unrepresented buyer. So you want to give them that BNA form stating, hey, I am not representing you, keep them over there. Buyer should not discuss terms with or help the unrepresented buyer complete the offer or really any forms. The broker should remind the buyer that the broker is acting in the capacity as a seller broker only with any further communications with the unrepresented buyer and should refer the buyer to the previously provided BNA form. So unfortunately, they may struggle through a little bit, and this is why we have the extra work fee. You would refer them to other sources to get their information. You can only provide the forms in a blank format to them. So how should you respond to an offer written by an unrepresented buyer? You may find that this offer comes over with hardly anything filled in, and we can't have that either. So again, it should be evaluated on its own merits by considering the offer's terms and presentation. A relevant factor could include the fact that the buyer is unrepresented. The seller can decide to not respond at all, reject the buyer's offer, and I would recommend formally rejecting the offer in writing, just so you don't catch any kind of complaints from the buyer saying, "Oh, you didn't present my offer." They can accept the buyer's offer, or they can issue a counter to the buyer's offer. The buyer's offer is poorly written, does not contain terms approved by the seller, may be in the best interest in the counteroffer to reject the buyer's offer in its entirety and refer to and include with the counteroffer a new purchase agreement offer prepared by the listing broker on behalf of the seller with terms acceptable to the seller. So that's how you can kind of get past that if you get a really poorly written offer where maybe it just has the price and a couple other things in there. The chances that they're going to fill this out properly are pretty slim. So yeah, you could basically reject it and say, hey, here's what the seller is willing to do. If agreeable, sign it. And it's kind of in reverse, but that could work as well for risk management purposes. If the listing agent or other agent in the same brokerage company as a listing agent prepares an offer for the buyer, that buyer will be represented by the brokerage company. Um, I don't know if I need to go through like really the rest of this stuff. Really, I wanted to cover the unrepresented buyer stuff. Any questions? What are you seeing out there? Are you having issues? The biggest thing that I'm hearing, or one of the biggest things, is that listing agents are receiving offers without the SPBB. Without the SPBB, this buyer is not asking the seller to pay for the buyer's agent's compensation, which can happen. I mean, if the buyer is totally willing and ready to pay for the buyer's um, the buyer's agent's commission, they don't have to include the SPBB then. But if they're sending you the BRBC and expecting that you're going to pay that amount on there, that's not the proper way to ask it. And actually, that means absolutely nothing in the forms of a contract, because they haven't asked for you to pay it. They haven't asked the seller to pay. So if you are a listing agent and you're receiving offers with only a buyer rep agreement and no SPBB attached, you might want to bring that to their attention, because technically the buyer is on the hook for whatever amount is in the BRBC, and the buyer has not asked the seller to credit that amount back, although that is what probably the expectation was with that whole scenario. So you don't want to get into this escrow and then all of a sudden hit this snag where, you know, the buyer is like, why do I have this extra, these extra closing costs? Why is the why am I paying the buyer's agent's commission? The seller was supposed to be paying it. And now the seller's like, well, you didn't ask for it and I don't want to pay it now. I mean, that scenario could definitely happen. So, you don't want that to happen because your deal is probably going to fall apart, and get really ugly. So, I know that that could be in the benefit of the seller, but at the same time, is it in the benefit of the seller to get 3 weeks into an escrow and realize the buyer doesn't have the funds to close because they didn't ask for the seller to pay, and now the seller feels no obligation to, you know? So that's a very real thing that can happen. So be sure as a buyer's agent, you're including not just checking the box in the RPA, but also including the form. All you got to do is fill out the number of the compensation amount. That's all you have to do and have it signed. Um, if you renegotiate your commission during the process, a lot of brokers are asking for a new SPBB form to be signed. That's okay. You can do that as well. As the listing broker, if you're asking them to do that, yes, you would still sign the original SPBB form, because that was part of the offer, just like an addendum or an amendment or anything. Well, not an amendment, but an addendum with the offer. That was part of the offer package. and then you countered it with your counter offer. So yes, you would still sign the SPVB form. That's another question we've been getting. Any other questions that you've been seeing out there? Let's see here. Looks like we have one Q&A. Someone said, market listed home as a buyer agent. Would you please guide how we should proceed? Market listed home as a buyer's agent. I don't quite understand that question. If you want to embellish on that one. Any other questions? Do we all feel like we have it down pretty good, or seen any shadiness out there from other brokers? I haven't seen too much. So I have seen buyer's agents get pretty aggressive with the amounts they're offering though. So and that's totally okay. It's all completely negotiable now. So well, whoever asked that question, if you want to just get me on my phone, maybe we could go over that scenario. So if there's no other questions and we're all doing great on this, I say we could go ahead and wrap up. We will have a meeting next week on Monday as usual. Christmas parties are next week, Monday and Tuesday. I did put a link in the chat. If you have not RSVP'd yet, you can do so on that Google form. We'll send out a text blast today too, just as kind of a final reminder, so that we can get our final head count over. But hopefully you guys can make it out there. I look forward to seeing everybody next week. And yeah, if we don't have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. So, Gary, thanks for coming on, and thanks for the questions, everybody, and hope you have a great week. Talk to you soon.